All right, what's up, guys? We're back for episode 2. We're going to move on to something a little more interesting for this episode 2. I'm going to put the app on pause. I know I successfully added the authentication thing, and you just know what the website does, but I want to go into something that's trending, has high value, and what everybody's talking. Everybody's talking about Model Context Protocol. Also, you can deploy a Chat Apps SDK Next Starter template, and you can have Flask Python-based APIs deployed on Vercel. These are huge things. So I think this is a great opportunity to try these out. So let's start with MCP with Express first. All right, it says that we can clone it locally, but I'm going to deploy it and see if that works. So I'm just going to hit this deploy button. All right, it looks like it was deployed. So let's go to the dashboard. I'll navigate to this URL. I guess when you visit it, it's just a blank page. So let's just go into the code and test it locally. All right, so I'm going to clone the project into my local. Into the project. All right, and I'll just open the project in Windsurf. It looks like there's some errors. I think I need to do a pnpm install. I want to run this server locally. So I'm going to research the README and ask questions about this code base. I'm going to just use Grok Code Fast just so that I can learn more about this project. So I'll do that and I'll come back and see what I find. All right, so here's what I found. The project is only just an MCP server that you can run, but doesn't have any way to test any AI agents within it. Plus, I came across so many different errors, but luckily I fixed some things up for you guys. So let's jump right in and check out what we got. So the first command we need to run is pnpm start. And when you run this command, it'll run your server local. All right, now it's running on localhost 3000. So all you need to do is just navigate to localhost 3000 and it's deployed. Okay, so it's just an MCP server. But how do we hook it up to an AI agent? So that's where I added a scripts folder where we test an agent, multi-agent, and a Vercel agent using the Vercel AI SDK. All right, so first let's look at the server, the MCP server. So here we have a server that has access to weather.gov. All right, so we have some functions and some interfaces here, but when you scroll down, we have this create server. Inside the create server, we have server tools. We have two tools. The first weather is to get alerts, and the other tool is to get the forecast. And both tools are calling an endpoint and making a request. And the request is coming from this function, which is making an HTTP request and returning back a response. So this is what our server is doing. In the index.ts file, this is just our entry point file. So our entry point is where we're using Express as the app to allow us to expose the MCP server. So we have a post request, a get request, and a delete request, and the entry point, which is where we start the server. All right, so at SRC, we have two files which serves as our MCP server. Now we need to hook up the MCP server to an agent. We need to allow agents to use these tools inside the MCP server. So that's where the scripts folder comes in, where we have some agents. So the first agent, we're using OpenAI Agents SDK. And we're doing a few things here. We're defining the URL of the MCP server. We're just specifying our prompt next right here. And here we're initializing the MCP server so that we can give it to the OpenAI agent. So we take this variable and we give it to the agent right here. So we define agent, we give a name, instructions, and we set the MCP server here. Inside the try catch block is that we connect to the server, and then we use the OpenAI SDK run function to run the agent so we can get back a result. And then we get back the result and we print out the response. To run this file, we'll just take this command, agent.local, which is one of our scripts in the package.json file. So we'll run pnpm agent local. You have to make sure you have your MCP server running. So just make sure on a different terminal you run pnpm start. All right, so when you run this agent.mjs file, it's going to execute the agent. So here's our prompt. What are the current weather alerts for California? And we get back a response successfully. So let's move on to the next file, multi-agent. Now what this is doing is that we're initializing two independent sessions of the MCP server, and we're giving it to two agents. So we have agent A and we have agent B. Agent A is basically the responsibility is to use the MCP tool to list out its capabilities. So when I talk to this agent, its purpose is just to list out the tools so that I can confirm that it is using the MCP server. The next agent is to use the tool to answer weather questions. So right here, we're using a promise to run the agents concurrently in parallel. So let's run this file. And all you need to do is run this command right here, agents multi. So just run agents multi. All right, and what you're gonna see is that agent A, the prompt is list the available MCP tools and their parameters. And the response is, here are the available MCP tools along with their input parameters. So the first tool is get alert and get the forecast. The other agent, we asked agent B, which is this one right here, we said, what is the forecast for these longitude and latitude? And the response is, here's the weather forecast for longitude and latitude for San Francisco. And we get the response right here. So that's working. So both of these files are using the OpenAI SDK. Now, I also want to point out that there's an example here from the Vercel AI SDK using the MCP server. So we do something similar. We initialize the MCP client, which is the MCP server. And here you see that we're importing the AI Vercel SDK for OpenAI. So we're using this object here to initialize OpenAI, and we use this OpenAI object inside the generate text function. So we're saying generate text, we're specifying the model, we're giving the tools, and the tool is the MCP tool. So we say MCP client.tools, and we take this object and we're just passing it into the generate text function, and this will return the response. So then we say prompt, we just print out the prompt, and then we print out the response. So it's very easy. I like how Vercel AI SDK makes it nice and clean compared to the other ones. So let's run this file. So we're going to run pnpm Vercel agent local. So discover the tools. We have 2 tools. Here's the prompt we're sending, and it looks like we got no response back. Let me figure out what's going on. All right, so it looks like I had to make a few changes where I had to add a little more parameters here, and also I print out the response, meaning that I had to use result.text. Now we're going to try to deploy this to production in Vercel, and let's see what happens. All right, so I just pushed out my changes. I created a pull request, and now I'm going to create the pull request. When I refresh the page, you'll see that a preview environment was deployed for me. But I'm going to deploy this directly to production because I want to use the production URL. And now I am here in Vercel. I'm going to go to deployments, and right now my production URL is being built. So I'm going to wait for that to finish. All right, so it's been deployed. All right, now we just need to test it with the production endpoint. So instead of using the local host endpoint, we'll be using this endpoint. So in the package.json file, I have this script agent.prod, which is going to use this endpoint right here in the command. So let's run that command. Here's the prompt, and we should get back a response. And we get back a good response. Now let's go check the logs in Vercel, and it looks like we got a good request. So this is working as expected. Now we are using sessions, and we're not storing sessions. I think the correct way in production is that you need to store a session, and then when the agent comes back to chat, it will pull that previous session to pick up the previous conversation. That's my assumption, but I believe that when you chat with AI agents, you need to have consistent sessions or create like a new session so we can come back to like a thread of a previous conversation. So let's test out the other script. Let's try the bell. So let's say pnpm agent, let's pnpm agent prod. All right, so when we run the Vercel AI agent, we're getting back an empty response. And in the logs, it said it's a 400 bad request. So I think this is related to sessions where we need to store the session somewhere and then reuse it so we can send back the response. But I'm not 100% sure. So I'm having GPT-5 help me out, and it's saying that it's likely due to a streaming session propagation in production, meaning that the streamable HTTP request requires the same session across the post request and the GET stream. So on Vercel, a proxy may strip the custom MCP session ID header on the GET request or otherwise the interface with the streaming step. So the client never sees the tool result, leaving result.text empty and state undefined. All right, so I think we made a lot of good progress. I'm gonna set this challenge for you guys to try this out, and maybe you guys can figure out on solving this problem. I think this is a great learning opportunity to figure out how sessions work between agents and MCP servers. I think a great tip would be integrating a Redis cache or a database to store the sessions so that we reuse the same session on each agent request. So I think that is the solution. I provided some documentation here. So you'll see there's some architecture documentation so you can understand how things work at an architecture level. There is some flow diagrams as well that are really nice to help you understand the sequence and communication between the AI agent and the MCP server. I also added some documentation about how session works. So this is a great tip on how you can fix this issue that we're having in production and resolve it using custom sessions with maybe a cache or a database. There's also the session persistence on vercel.md file that has some great notes. And we have the persistent MCP sessions on Vercel with Vercel KV Redis. So you can go through this documentation to get an idea of how you can implement this and fix the production issue. So let me know what you guys think. If you guys need any help, let me know. I'm really looking forward to hear what you guys say in the comments about this video. Let me know what you guys think. But you can go to the repo. It's open source. It's free. It's pretty straightforward. Just in the env file, just add in your OpenAI API key. You can set this MCP URL for localhost, deploy it to Vercel, meaning that, of course, you have to have a GitHub account and a Vercel account to test this out. Because this template is from Vercel, but I have just optimized it to integrate it with the agents so that the agents can interface with the MCP server. So I hope you guys like this video. If you guys have any questions, leave it in the comments. I'll try to reach out and respond back as soon as I can. I'll catch you guys later.